Good evening, Ms. Jourová, Irene. Welcome to all of you to the Graduate Institute and to this event that is organized by the Albert Hirschman Centre on Democracy on the very important topic of democracy in the digital age. We have really quite an exceptional roster of speakers tonight who will in all likelihood take us through the complexities of that issue. We will start with an online opening statement by Ms. Michelle Bachelet, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Then Irene Khan will take the floor. Irene is UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of opinion and expression, but she's also, and we are delighted about that, distinguished fellow at the Geneva Graduate Institute, particularly associated with the Albert Hirschman Centre. Irene will be doing the proper introduction for our distinguished guest and keynote speaker, Ms. Vera Eurova, who is Vice President of the European Commission for Values and Transparency, and also of Ms. Nada Al-Nashif, who will be presenting some concluding remarks at the end. Let me express my deep gratitude to the team in the Albert Hirschman Centre for the organization of such an exceptional event. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Bala. Thank you, Graziella, to you and to the entire team. I would also like to extend a huge thank you to Melissa and to the events team at the Institute for making this possible, concretely and logistically possible. The digital turn is affecting almost everything, and it is quite clear that it is here to stay. The COVID period has obviously contributed to accelerating what is a profound transformation with possibly existential consequences. Economic value chains have been affected by digitalization, our work, our health, and our education systems, our social and even our intimate relationships, and obviously our political systems and our democracy have all been deeply affected and transformed. Arguably, we as a species may even be redefined, if not overcome in the process, as some in the Silicon Valley would tend to suggest. The digital turn is, as I like to call it, and some of you know that, a Janus. It has two faces. It is undeniable that the digital revolution has many exceptional and positive consequences, and we saw that particularly, obviously, during the pandemic. It allowed us to continue working, to continue interacting. But this bright side has to be balanced, we now know, we are now sure of, with another darker side that generates potentially a lot of disruption with worrying consequences. The digital turn transforms work and economic value chains with a lot of efficiency and cost advantages, but it also destroys jobs, and it fragilizes, as a consequence, the economic and the social situation of certain groups in our societies, increasing and hardening inequalities in the process. The digital turn has created the means for us to be virtually connected with our close ones, even when they are not present physically, but also with many new people that we would never have met otherwise. And still, the strength of these virtual connections tends to weaken real human interactions. The digital turn, in other words, while it's supposed to connect us, contributes as well to the deepening of a large epidemic of loneliness, on an unprecedented scale that touches all age groups, all generations, with consequences on almost all dimensions of our lives, and particularly on our health, whether mental or physical. And naturally, to turn to today's theme, the digital age could, in principle, have facilitated democratic processes. It could have helped render our democracies more inclusive and more extensive. But what we have seen instead over the past few years is the danger that digital technologies are creating for our democracies. This danger comes through two main trends. The first is the fragmentation and increasing opposition of us versus them, which digital technologies and the current functioning of algorithms appear to reinforce. Essentially, this makes debate increasingly difficult, if not impossible. The second trend is disinformation and misinformation, which is made possible by the fluidity of the digital world, its peculiar temporality, and the lack of control, regulation, and sanctions in that space. Here again, we know that the good health of our democracies depends on education, on critical thinking, and on just and correct information. The disinformation and misinformation trend that characterizes our digital times is a destructive poison for our democracies. This is as simple as that. So what is to be done, and where is it to be done? The world puts its hopes in Europe, and for once I would like to include Switzerland in my definition of Europe. If something can be not done to limit the dark consequences of our digital age for democracy, and on the contrary, retool digital technologies at the service of healthy democratic dynamics, then this probably can only start in Europe. It won't start in the US, because the power and the lobbying means of the GAFAM remain way too strong there. It won't happen in China, because the political power is using digital technologies in a completely different direction. So the onus is on us, Europe, in the large sense of the term. What can we do and how can we do it? I'm looking very much forward to listening to Ms. Jourová on this, but we should also be aware that we can all do something wherever we are. Let me finish with an illustration of that. At the Geneva Graduate Institute, we have decided a few months ago to create a working group that brings together students, faculty members, and staff to co-produce a code of digital conduct that will set the rules for digital interactions that we wish to give to ourselves. Strangely enough, there are very few universities that have launched such a process. The idea for us is to preserve the capacity for respectful debates and interactions within our community by creating collectively agreed upon rules to monitor digital presence and digital interactions. It is only if we all take it upon ourselves to work at all levels on mechanisms that limit the dark side and consequences of the digital turn that we will avoid the path that leads to radical dystopia. We have once again, and this is not the first time in human history, to steer technology back to being at the service of humanity and to avoid the current slide towards a world where humanity is at the service of technology, or even finally getting to be destroyed by it. So thank you all for being here tonight, and I think that, if I'm not mistaken, we are now listening to Ms. Bachelet.
Good afternoon to all. A warm thank you to the Graduate Institute and Special Rapporteur Irene for the invitation to participate in an event focused on a topic that has far-reaching effects for all of us. There can be no doubt that digital technologies have thrust our world forward towards unprecedented human progress. Yet, the digital age has also brought with it immense new challenges in protecting human rights and democracy. We don't have to look far to see indicators of regression. Online hate speech and disinformation are circulating at an accelerated pace. Journalists, politicians, and human rights defenders face constant surveillance and are subject to frequent online attacks. Pegasus spyware is purportedly being used in 45 countries, often in total secrecy and outside of any legal framework. Responding to these concerns is extremely challenging, as regulating communications always creates risks for the protection of freedom of expression. To give you some figures, in the last 2 years alone, my office has recorded over 60 countries which have either adopted or are considering new laws on social media. Many of these regulations are problematic, imposing restrictions that overreach and undermine fundamental rights. Internet and media shutdowns around the world, including Europe, are also on the rise. As more countries follow suit with such measures, these disturbing trends have ramifications for everyone. Safeguarding human rights and democratic space in the digital age has become more crucial than ever. My office has identified 3 key elements that are essential to ensure progress in this direction. First, protecting our right to participate is central to the protection of democracy. Civil society plays a key role here. It must be meaningfully engaged in the development of policies, regulation, and other measures relating to digital technologies and the online space. Journalists and civil society actors must have open and secure access to online spaces, free from surveillance and censorship. States and online companies have a responsibility to ensure this and make sure we have recourse when threats arise. Secondly, the right to freedom of expression must be preserved online as well as offline and must go hand in hand with addressing online hate speech and disinformation. While social media provides unique opportunities for connecting with others and mobilizing public debate, we are aware of companies' lack of effectiveness responding to users' concerns, their opaqueness and troubling market dominance, as well as of governments' failures to put in place rights-respecting regulations of the space. Crucially, any measures taken by companies and states to regulate speech must respond to the three-part test based on the principles of legality, necessity, and proportionality. Colleagues, the free flow of information is particularly vital in conflict situations such as the current war in Ukraine. Keeping the communications infrastructure operational and accessible to all, allowing the media to perform their work safely is particularly important. At the same time, widespread censorship and wholesale blocking of communication channels can be very counterproductive, increasing the exposure of people to propaganda. Neither blunt laws or tools that curtail expression nor internet shutdowns are the answer. Finally, we need to urgently address our right to privacy in the digital realm. Intrusive measures by states and businesses enable surveillance that feeds analysis, prediction, and even manipulation of our behavior, at times to the detriment of free, fair elections and democratic processes. Recent revelations about global abuses of spyware, targeting journalists, human rights defenders, dissidents, opposition politicians, and diplomats are in flagrant violation of the right to privacy. I emphasize that these abuses must stop, and I again call for a moratorium on the sale and transfer of surveillance technology until human rights protections are in place. The ongoing threat to the right to privacy plays out heavily on social media. Encryption and anonymity tools can counter the threat and allow users to exercise their rights to freedom of opinion and expression more safely. In parallel, national law should be developed to ensure strong data protection in line with human rights standards. Colleagues, states, and companies have responsibilities to uphold human rights, including in the online sphere, and we need to hold them accountable. Functional democratic processes require free flow of information, whether during elections, conflict, or other complex emergencies. Keeping free, pluralistic, independent information accessible to all and allowing journalists and human rights defenders to perform their work is paramount to the protection of human rights. Avoiding catastrophic setbacks for human rights and democracy in the digital sphere will take sustained and productive action. Let's ensure that we are taking those steps and advancing towards a world where we are protected from the dangers of attacks online and where freedom of expression and the right to participate are unhindered for all. I thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Ms. Jourová, and thank you to Marie-Laure Sall for her welcome remarks, and of course to the High Commissioner for her opening statement. I think we are off to a good evening, a good discussion this evening. But before I introduce the keynote speaker and invite her to come up to the podium, let me start from where the High Commissioner finished. The High Commissioner talked about the importance of free flow of information. And at the heart of the debate about the impact of digital technology on human rights lies, I think, the whole issue of communication and information. Now, I come from a part of the world where many governments believe that freedom of opinion and expression is a luxury meant for liberal democracies. But they are deeply mistaken. Freedom of expression is a meta right, And what I mean by that is that it plays a critical role in the enjoyment of a host of other rights, from our own health to the health of the planet, from the right to protest to our right of political participation, from academic freedom to artistic aspiration. Freedom of expression, freedom of opinion and expression, the free flow of information, absolutely critical for all those situations. It's not an absolute right. It can be restricted, but under very limited circumstances. It's an expansive right. It encompasses the right to seek, receive, and share information and ideas of all kinds across borders in any media. And I'm quoting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So whether false, offensive, or enlightened, information flow is permitted by international law, but not if it's harmful. So yes, this huge area of freedom is terrifying for those who wish to control our rights for their own ends, whether that be authoritarian governments or big digital tech giants. And nothing since the invention of the printing press has so transformed freedom of expression as digital tech. Now, I have seen in my own country, Bangladesh, how women in remote villages today have been empowered by digital technology. They're searching Google. They're communicating on Facebook, even behind their parda, behind their veil. So what digital technology has actually done is it has made information that was the privilege of a few into a tool for the emancipation of the masses. To be disconnected today from the net, not to be on a digital platform, is to be silenced, is to be excluded, is to be isolated. But, as we have heard from the High Commissioner, and as we will hear later today, access to the internet is not an unalloyed good. It is a poisoned chalice, poisoned by disinformation, misinformation, hate speech. Ironically, disinformation is not a new phenomenon. In my report on disinformation to the Human Rights Council last year, and that is the first report in the UN human rights system on this subject, I began with the story of Octavian, who 2,000 years ago spun a disinformation campaign to destroy his rival Mark Antony. He even spread small messages in small coins across the Roman territories, rather like our tweets these days, you may say. And of course, he eventually destroyed his rival and became Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor. So there is nothing new about disinformation or its power to destroy. What is new is that digital technology and the business model of the platforms allow information to be manipulated, spread at a speed, scale, and reach never known before, threatening our democracies, our economies, our health, our reputation, and much more. So, and here, with women today, from one end of the program to the other, of which I'm very proud, women speakers, I cannot help but point out the rise of gendered disinformation, which is damaging the health and safety of women, girls, LGBTQI plus individuals, seeking to denigrate, intimidate, and drive many women leaders out of the public space, effectively silencing their voices. So social media, digital platforms can promote good, or they can sow hate and distrust. And that is why even while Facebook was aiding genocide in Myanmar, it was also the only means by which many human rights defenders were able to connect to the outside world. And therein lies the irony. And that is why it is imperative that companies must do more to reduce disinformation, but also so must governments, and they must do the right thing. Undermining human rights to protect the information space is somehow contradictory, it's counterproductive. And we also need to speak about state-sponsored disinformation, when governments themselves are the source of disinformation. And here now in Europe, with the war in Ukraine, I think we are seeing the effects of that. The biggest casualty of war is truth, and the biggest casualty of disinformation is public trust. When people no longer have a shared understanding of facts, when they no longer know what is true and what is false, that's when society becomes polarized, when democracy begins to crumble. Freedom of expression is not part of the problem. Human rights are not part of the problem. In fact, they are the solution, because they enable us to build those strategies to address and rebuild, address the lack of trust and rebuild public trust. When freedom of expression is protected, when media can be free, independent, and pluralistic, people can access information, debate, discuss diverse views without fear. When platforms are obliged to be transparent, accountable, and respect human rights, when people are digital and media literate and know how to differentiate between verifiable information and unverifiable information, then false information can be challenged. Manipulation of information can be exposed. So, if that is the wise thing to do, not just the right thing to do, then what is holding back governments, you might ask? Well, at least one part of the world, in Europe, we see ideas coming up, new strategies, new thoughts, innovative thinking. And Europe, of course, has been in the human rights system. Europe has been ahead of many other regions of the world, as we know. It has the most developed, the most effective regional system of human rights. It has a very advanced system of multilateral governance. And so we have the privilege today to learn more about how Europe is tackling some of these problems that we've been talking about. And we have here the privilege of someone who has been at the forefront of the EU's fight against disinformation and who has campaigned through her work, through the Democracy Action Plan for strengthening elections and media freedom. And she is a major player in the Code of Practice on Disinformation and also in the forthcoming Media Freedom Act. The Digital Services Act, incidentally, was also something with which she was very closely involved, and that was adopted only a couple of days ago by the European Union, and which I actually commended in my report last year for seeking to enhance platform transparency and user control. So it is my great pleasure and privilege now to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Vera Eurova, who is the Vice President of the European Commission and also responsible for democracy, rule of law, for values, for the European Commission for Values and Transparency, and she deals with democracy, rule of law, media pluralism, and the fight against disinformation. She is absolutely the right person here for us, and we are delighted to have her with us. She was, prior to that, she was also as the EU Commissioner for Justice, Consumers, and Gender Equality. So I think she brings a wide and broad understanding of how the European Union works on these issues. And so if I may invite you, Ms. Jourová, to please come to the podium.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a warm welcome. Thank you very much. Yes, I was the commissioner responsible for gender equality, so my question is, where are the men?
They're in the audience with me.
I would like to encourage you, dear men, be active. Yeah, because technology seems to be the men domain, and suddenly we are all women here, and not only here. I think that here we will be more speaking about society than technology. And this is what a little bit qualifies me to have a say into that. My children always ask me, Mommy, how can you speak at the conferences with the subtitle of technologies? The European Union must be in really deep trouble. And I say to them, no, this is not about technologies, this is about society and the way we live. And the mirror we get through the digital screen, because this is we see new things about ourselves. I don't know what to add, because there were 3 strong speeches and there is not much to add, but I will try to be concrete and tell you what Europe is doing, because as Madam Irene just said, who, if not European Union, should have the courage to regulate the tech and the big tech? America cannot do it because it's driven by the money there. It was born in Silicon Valley, and the money has big power there, and they got used to it. And honestly, the Americans are not that sensitive about, for instance, the protection of their privacy. Simply, the big tech could develop in America because the society was welcoming such development. Can China do it? My God. I heard some ideas about how fantastic it is to have the technologies to keep the society under control. It was some years ago, and the Chinese minister said that he would like to cooperate in the field of data protection. And he said that they like it, and I said, well, but we go a different direction. So I think Europe is well placed, and we are pioneering in legislating. We decided that digital space is not a holy cow which is untouchable. We need rules, and we need them to be enforced. The title of this speech is Democracy in the Digital Age. Very often I receive a question, can democracy survive digital? And because I don't know, I have the answer. Yes, but we have to democratize digital and digitalize democracy. And it sounds so wise that nobody dares to ask me, how do you mean it? But I will try to explain how I mean it. As my predecessors, the ladies who spoke before me said, there are good things and bad things which we are harvesting now from the digital revolution. We see that digital revolution already influenced history. Just imagine Arabic Spring, you mentioned Myanmar, Maidan in Ukraine in 2014 is started by a very innocent comment in the social media by one of the journalists. People, where are you? There is something wrong happening. And in 2 hours, there were, I think, 10,000 of people in Maidan. And in 3 days, there were several killed people in Maidan at the same time. These were the first victims of today's horrible, disgusting war in Maidan in 2014, and we didn't do enough to protect them. It's another story. Just look at attack on Capitol in Washington. It was just imposed or encouraged by the communication on social media and by direct calls of the sitting president for violence. Just look at Brexit. We lost a country. We would like to achieve a new one. Maybe Switzerland might change decision. But Brexit campaign was full of disinformation and verifiable lie, which nobody verified, because there was such power in it that they simply want to. Those who were leading the campaign for leave did not hesitate to use this manipulative technique. So. Good and bad things. Good things, I had a meeting with Mark Zuckerberg several years ago, and he tried to convince me about the good things. I am a little bit smiling because we spoke about 2 different things, because I told him, Mr. Zuckerberg, but you created the tribal society again with those divisions. Over centuries we tried to get rid of this tribal organization of our society. We try to have inclusive society, and suddenly you came, and suddenly we are again divided. And I was not able to convince him that there is something wrong. And so after all, we realized that we cannot just have gentlemen agreements with the big tech. And not to be bashing only big tech, there are many small techs who can also do big harm. Yeah, that's why we decided to legislate, and I will come to it. First, I would like to speak about strengthening democracy and democratic resilience through informed political decisions and discourse. Let me start the talk on democracy with the general notion that citizens must be able to make choices on the basis of views that have been expressed freely. Facts have to be distinguished from fiction. Free media and civil society must be able to participate in an open debate free from malign interference. In this context, new technologies should be tools for emancipation, not for manipulation. I met in Lisbon several years ago Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is considered to be one of the inventors of internet. He was one of the saddest persons I ever met, because he said, I honestly thought that I invented something which will serve connecting people, education, more open communication, more understanding, more emancipation. And now I see that I invented something which serves the opposite. And so there is something to correct. I am slipping from my speech all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, this will be long. I am back. We designed measures in the European Democracy Action Plan to address the threats and to better protect our democratic system. They address areas in which our systems and citizens are most vulnerable to make our societies more resilient and better prepared for the challenges of the future. In the plan, we are covering 3 interconnected areas. One is countering disinformation, the other is protecting elections, and the third is strengthening independent media. When you think about it, all 3 areas come together as when well-functioning, the fight against disinformation, free media, and protection of elections, if they function well, then the democracy is protected sufficiently. If not, we have a trouble. And we do have a trouble. First, disinformation. According to the Eurobarometer, 51% of respondents report having been exposed to disinformation in European Union. We are looking at the sources of disinformation, enhancing the EU's and member states' capacity to address disinformation and developing the EU's toolbox for countering foreign interference. The aim is to allow for imposing costs on perpetrators. But this is not just about interference. It is about an ecosystem that makes interference easy and cheap. We are not seeking to control content or to determine what can or cannot be said. The objective is rather to address the risk of harmful content amplified and monetized at massive scale. Here we are looking at the channels and reducing the space for manipulation. An important part of our efforts in the online environment has been the Code of Practice on Disinformation. The code is a first of its kind self-regulatory instrument, so something the technological companies, but not only them, commit themselves to do. We try to bring here industry to commit to voluntary standards to counter disinformation. The code has proved to be an innovative tool, but we could also see incomplete and inconsistent implementation of the code across platforms and member states, gaps in coverage and limitations inherent in the code's self-regulatory nature, and clearly insufficient in light of the current challenges. Therefore, we published guidance setting out how signatories should strengthen the Code of Practice on Disinformation and create a more transparent, safe, and trustworthy online environment. So we are going further and setting up a new disinformation pact with platforms, advertisers, websites, and civil society. They need to improve the accountability of their algorithms. We are stopping platforms and websites from making money from disinformation. They have to design and deliver better ways to deal with manipulation, bots, and fake accounts. The new code also needs to come with meaningful key performance indicators and a robust monitoring framework. Work is ongoing now on the drafting of the new code. We are very pleased to see a remarkable growth in organizations that have joined the revised code of practice. On top of the previous signatories, 27 additional organizations from civil society, advertising, tech industry, online platforms, and providers of solutions to fight disinformation have joined that effort. Already now, we are in contact with the platforms to ensure implementation of the Ukraine-related sanctions, and we have also called them up to step up efforts to address the spread of war propaganda and harmful disinformation related to the war by Russian state-affiliated media outlets and by other actors, which they do through measures such as demonetizing, de-amplifying, or labeling state-affiliated channels. All of this comes in line with the freshly agreed Digital Services Act, which will be the general law imposing responsibilities on online service providers, with transparency, supervision, and auditing, redress mechanisms for users, sanctions for failure to act, and the obligation to assess and mitigate the often invisible risks its services pose. At the same time, it's important to not only dampen the voice of manipulation, but also to strengthen trustworthy information. The question, how do we strengthen the media and civil society that play a crucial role in providing information in a democratic debate? I will talk about media in a minute, but looking further at the demand side, we have unrolled initiatives to help make our education fit to digital reality. This will also allow us to navigate safely online, and that is an important way to increase democratic resilience. In other words, we need to make sure that the society is more resilient and that the people do not easily believe everything they read. I lived till my 25 in a totalitarian regime. I remember my father always was telling me, do not believe anything you read in newspaper, in communist newspaper. And now my advice is, do not believe everything. And that's why we try to do more also on fact-checking and to serve people some alternative choice. Because I don't know if you have time for fact-checking, do you? I don't. And I believe sometimes those news which increase the adrenaline and blood pressure, and then I realize what I'm doing in my professional career, and I remind myself, do not believe that. It's very difficult because we all have a tendency to believe what we want to believe. Or what the Tsar says. The Tsar, whose name is Putin. I think that Russia is a starking reminder of how far the regime can go in making the people blind and deaf. Elections. Fair elections and democratic participation, it's another topic we are focusing on in our action plan. When we analyzed the impact of the Cambridge Analytica, remember the method, abuse of private data and serving the political marketing to the vulnerable targets. Everybody is vulnerable online because we are reporting very sensitive data about ourselves, so it's easy to target us. We didn't want to have it in Europe. We didn't want to have unregulated online space for political advertising. We didn't want to have disinformation campaigns to influence the elections by some last-minute attacks. And we didn't want to have the elections endangered by cyber attacks. So this is, in a very, very short way, explained how we want to protect the elections in the European Union. Because what we see in the dangers in the method of algorithms which the technological companies are using, because we still see them as advertising industry. And they use the algorithms to sell the products on the basis of knowledge of what might work for us. Now I will say something my colleagues will hate, yeah? I open my iPad and I always see the vacuum cleaner there. What do they think? A lady over 50, divorced, frustrated, she must love cleaning. There are sometimes some weird things which I find, don't worry, I will not say it. And I feel the manipulation. And I think that if they sell me the vacuum cleaner or the shoes or I don't know, some piece of furniture, if I give up and I will just jump on that, I will buy the shoes and the vacuum cleaner for myself. But they are using exactly, as a consumer, but they are using exactly the same method for selling politicians, like the vacuum cleaner. Just imagine, you will jump on it, you will buy the politician, but you will buy the politician also for others. It's a difference. So that's why we proposed stricter rules for political marketing, or the political advertising online, because we believe that the citizens, potential voters, deserve to have stronger protection against manipulation than the consumers who might wish to buy a vacuum cleaner. That's the core idea behind the regulation on political advertising, which is a twin to Digital Services Act. Digital Services Act is the lex specialis. It was adopted a few days ago, indeed. And now this regulation on the political advertising is waiting for adoption. We want to mainly two things, that those who read the advertisements know that this is paid by somebody who want you to go and vote for somebody. And believe me, it was a big struggle, because at the end of the day, we put also the organizations, some NGOs, who have political program into this. Because it's not only political parties which advertise and which want to influence the voters' behavior. It can be anyone else. So we are not prohibiting anything, we just say it has to be transparent. And people have to understand this is what I read now is seeks to influence my political, my voting decision. The second key thing I wanted to tell you is that we prohibit the use of sensitive data for this political advertising method or the algorithms. So race, religion, sexual orientation, political opinions which you share with the online sphere must not be used as the micro-targeting criteria. We will see if this passes on through the legislative process. The big tech, some of them already signaled to me, well, if this is such a strict legislation, we might not provide our space for political advertising at all. So coming back to Mr. Zuckerberg's original idea that they will just be selling something innocent, mainly entertainment. I'm not sure if they will do that, but it's true that in Europe we will have the stricter rules, strictest rules globally. Media freedom and media pluralism are I believe you will agree with me, really essential to our democracies. And it's also enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And today, when we are watching the pictures from Ukraine under fire, we have to be grateful to all the courageous people who are willing to do this highly risky job, to do the work of the job of journalists on Ukrainian territory. I think at this moment there have been 20 killed journalists, mainly Ukrainians, but also some foreign journalists. We are paying now. We have paid 5 million euro to protect the Ukrainian, the journalists in the Ukraine better. Preparing another 12 million euro to do the same thing later. But let's be grateful, because thanks to them we have some idea about the horrible scale of this unimaginable, dirty conflict. And yeah, I am biased. I myself lived in the country which was occupied by Russians 23 years, from 1968, when nobody came to help us, to Czechoslovakia, when we were occupied by Russians. And they stayed 23 years. And I'm afraid this war might also result in Russian troops staying in Ukraine. So let's help, let's do everything. I am totally now out of my paper. So coming back to media in Europe. We also have some injured and many injured and some killed journalists in European countries. So that's why we are doing several things now, which is not very traditional or habitual for the European Union to legislate the field of media, but I found a narrow loophole in the legislation, primary legislation. So we issued a recommendation to the member states to protect the journalists better. It's a list of very concrete things, starting with the digital security, down to the security during the protests, very concrete, and also something I will want to see in practice. Of course, recommendation is a soft law. They can do it, but they also can just say what the Commission wants. We will not invest in it. But I can tell you, the murdered journalist in Malta, Daphne Caruana Galizia, the murdered journalist in Slovakia, Jan Kuciak, they are big reputational blows for their countries. So everybody knows this is the country where a journalist was killed because he and she disclosed corruption cases with the involvement of governments. So we need to do more because for the safety of journalists, because they work for all of us. We will on Wednesday adopt the anti-SLAPP legislation, because we do not want the journalists to be the easy targets of abusive litigations. There are a lot of cases when somebody powerful, politician or economic elephant, just dislikes what the journalists are writing, so they are lodging new and new complaints and cases to the courts wherever in Europe to starve the journalists out, to stop them working. This is justice system abused against democracy by attacking the journalists. So we will adopt the legislation in 2 days. I will have to travel across Europe and explain that we are not creating some untouchable casta of journalists, that in case they write something wrong, something which will not be based on evidence, something which will do harm, and especially intended harm to some concrete people, they have to pay some price for that. But we want to put an end to the abusive litigation against the journalists in Europe. And in July, I like to adopt or have the College of Commissioners, the Commission adopted the European Media Freedom Act. I hope will increase the standards for the protection of media as the sector, because at this moment, the only protection they have equals the protection of the shoemakers or somebody else who operates on the European single market. They do not have any special legal protection in the EU. But they are doing something more than good shoes. They play the role in promoting and protecting European democracy, so they deserve some more protection. We want to set the standards for independence. We want to set some barriers against the political and economic influence. We want to set some barriers against the dangerous mergers and concentration of media in some concrete hands. We want to create some more safeguards even for the public media. And there is a big panic in the media sector already now. And I try to speak to everybody who might be nervous. Because why panic? Because the media sector, publishers, the audiovisual industry, the public media bosses, they are nervous that we might decrease the standards for the countries where the system of protection of independence of media works well. This is not my plan, to decrease the standards, rather the contrary. So it will come in July in case we are well ready with that, because I need to consult with the media sector. And at the end to decide. I think I already spoke about Ukraine and the brave fight of Ukraine's people to defend their democracy in the face of Russia's invasion and brutal aggression, which is a testament to how precious democracy is. I have a noble title of my job, Commissioner for Values and Transparency. And I was the Justice Commissioner also dealing with values like democracy, human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. And I was rather frustrated still back in 2014-15. I felt that the words do not have content, that they have been emptied, that we speak about peace, freedom, I don't know, security in the abstract way. And I was thinking about, do we really need to live through another tragic conflict, some war or some horrible tragedy, to give the words again the content? I'm afraid we are there now. And I think that it's amazing, in spite of all the horrors we see in Ukraine, that we were able to unite. Even Switzerland, am I allowed to say it, forgot for a moment about the neutrality. And they said clearly and showed clearly who they are or who the country is. Because this is the who is who moment. This is the moment of truth. And we have to help and we have to win. Because this is also our war. I was long. And believe me, I didn't read everything my beloved colleague prepared for me. Well, they are used to it, no? Thank you very much. I am available for your questions if you still have time.
I hope this is working. Okay, well, thank you very much for an interesting speech, much more interesting than whatever your colleagues wrote, I'm sure. Because it is always when we listen to people like you who are at the heart of change and big change, powerful changes, then we are always curious to know what are you actually thinking. And thank you for revealing your thoughts. That helps us as academics, but also as human beings to relate to the dilemmas and challenges that you go through. Now, there are a lot of people online, and they are welcome to send their questions and comments. Unfortunately, I don't seem to have received much, but I'm going to open it up now to the room first to see whether anyone would like to ask a question. I don't know whether there is a mic.
It's fine. I can speak
Yeah.
quite loud.
Okay. Yeah, someone's coming. No, someone's coming. I think it's for the recording purpose.
Okay. First of all, thank both of you for this very interesting conference. I have a very difficult question for you because I myself work with the social dilemma team to improve, to raise awareness in high school in Switzerland on some of the issues you talked about. And you were talking about the importance of reducing disinformation, trying to push all these giant tech companies to do something against this. And as you know, there are two main factors that increase the disinformation. One is, of course, because of the business model of these social media. So it tends to increase the polarization of the society by having feeds that show what you are usually watching. However, a big part of the problem is from the people themselves, because some researchers in American universities show that people are 6 times more likely to share fake news than real news, because fake news are more interesting, real news might be more boring. So many of the things you talk, they are of course very important, but they will only help one part of the problem. And do you have any idea on how to solve this other part, how to encourage people to not participate to this polarization of the society?
Yes, indeed. I tried to explain, and I will maybe go now deeper, that when working against disinformation, I normally get the question, will you censor? Will you introduce censorship in Europe? So I want to directly say no. No, we tried to invent some sophisticated model where we are looking at the producers of the disinformation, when they are foreign actors who are intentionally producing disinformation, which with the aim to do harm to European society, we take action and we will penalize them. We are now inventing the way. But it's just this intentional action, this information operations, which as we see now fall even under the Russian military doctrine. Yeah? They use now disinformation as weapons. Then we look at the channels, and I spoke about it, the platforms and the amplifiers, and we look at the targets who are the people. But they are not passive. As you rightly say, they are driving themselves this process of amplification of the disinformation. And it has always been the case. I remember when I studied philosophy, Marshall McLuhan, in his theory of media, he said there are 3 topics which will always have a speedy way to the readers. Violence, money, and sex. And this is what we see now as well. When there is a well-designed disinformation, something where there is a little portion of truth, there is always a little portion of something that might be true. And big portion of lie, it flies 7 times quicker than the boring truth. Yeah, we have good data showing that. And why? Because the people love it. And why also? Because the companies make good money on it, because it sells better. But you didn't ask me for analysis, did you? You asked me for a solution. So we also cover this issue of the targets of the society, and this is a long-distance run. I will not hide it. We are now introducing the media and digital education everywhere we can. Also, we are pushing the member states to increase the education and in lighting or awareness raising in their recovery plans. We are investing a lot into the recovery after COVID, so that to make the society more resilient and to make the people more, I don't know, able to defend themselves. Because if we want to defend the people against the right to read the lie, it will be start of the censorship. Yeah. The second thing is the amplification, because there is a slogan. It's not mine. Whose slogan is it, Danielle? The right of speech is not the right of reach. Yeah? So everybody can send there the opinion, but there is no right to have the opinion amplified and distributed everywhere. Yeah? So this is what we also work on with the digital platforms, that they could introduce some ranking of different kinds of information. But I don't want to go too much into details on that. Freedom of speech, it's a big protected principle for Europe, and it remains the same also now in the wartime. But freedom of speech was never meant to be absolute in Europe. There are limits. How I understand it, if you recognize the freedom of speech as absolute thing, then you kind of resign on valuing the truth. Then you appear in total kind of nihilism. That's why some speech is prohibited already now by the criminal laws in the member states. But it's not the case of disinformation, because lie is not illegal. What's illegal is hate speech, child pornography, extremism, terrorism. These are prohibited kinds of content. So we, in the Digital Services Act, we make those who amplify the content to remove the criminal content, because otherwise they are becoming co-perpetrators of the crime. But when it comes to disinformation, we are much more careful, and the code of practice is working more with the fact-checking and also this ranking rather than removal of some content. There are two exceptions. I have to be honest with you. Several years ago, I would never believe that we will design or define some authority to be the arbiter of the truth. And we had to do it in COVID pandemic. Yeah? Because it was so massive that this information became the poison. It was dangerous to health of people. That's why we had to make an agreement that the health authorities will have privileged access to the platforms to be first-hand information for the people. And the second moment is the war. We are now in the information war. We are flooded by the Russian propaganda. And so we decided to sanction Russia Today and Sputnik. I would never believe we will do such a thing in Europe. We had to, because it was a clear-cut source of Russian propaganda, war propaganda, which wanted to manipulate the brains and hearts of Europeans. And the second thing I would never believe is, I heard myself saying to Facebook and Google and other big ones, start removing the clear cases of Russian pro-Kremlin propaganda, obvious lies. Do more, because we have to protect ourselves. And it was not an easy moment for me, because for years I was telling Google and others, do not touch the content, unless it's criminal one, yeah? We spoke about it. Do not touch, do not dare to moderate political discussion of Europeans. Do not invade with your political opinions, because of course these digital gods have the access to our sitting rooms and to our brains. And now I was telling them, please help, we need you. And it's strange, because several years ago I sat at some closed Liberal Party event. It was not a party. One day we will have to decide between Putin and Zuckerberg. It was in 2016. And it was scandalous. They said, how do you mean it? How come Zuckerberg is such an evil? And then the discussion started, who is bigger evil, whether Putin or Zuckerberg? I will leave it for you now, yeah, to decide. I already made my choice. You know how it works. You gave me the question. I didn't answer it. But I served to you so many other things. Thank you.
Yeah, you certainly did. And it made me think that, you cannot ever take the human out of this issue. So we talk about technology, we talk about rules, we talk about platforms, but it is the human psychology at the end of the day. And if you are a school teacher, then you have the children there, and it's through education, through awareness, through debate, that the human mind eventually changes. And we today, more and more, we use the internet to do the work that we used to do in the past as human beings, trying to persuade each other. So maybe what we need to do more is think about that human community. And I say that as someone who comes from the developing world, where thankfully community is still there. And but people think that modernizing means technology, the shift. And I keep telling them, no, there are some things about the village elder sitting under the tree and talking to resolve conflicts is still something valuable.
And if I may add, this will maybe sound academic, but you said that this is about the community. But how we understand in Europe community? Is it a crowd? Or is it the community based on individual people who have their rights and who know their rights? And I think that creating the crowd, it's in the toolbox of the authoritarian powers, always. To create a crowd, it's something which helps you to have it under control. Crowd is so easy to manipulate. And that's why, in fact, we adopted GDPR several years ago. Yeah, because we saw that the private data of people was abused by big digital business. And not only big one, again, also by smaller ones, because the people didn't have any individual right anymore. They lost, in fact, their identity in this digital sea. Yeah? And that's why we came with the GDPR, which gave it back to individual people. What is the difference between the crowd and the society? I think that this is also something we should speak about, but this would be academic if I continue now.
But I think there are some people in this room who are working precisely on those kinds of issues. Can I ask if there are other questions? Yes, at the back, the lady at the back.
Thank you very much for this important and very interesting discussion today. Thank you also for telling us more about this EU Democracy Action Plan. And I was wondering if you could share if there is consensus among the EU states, what does it mean harmful or harm? Because as you rightly pointed out, it's about education, psychology, and values, democracy, peace, freedom. But people, as I perceive it online, are becoming even cynical. They do not believe in democracy. They do not see it as a value. So they do not see harm in the disinformation. So perhaps it's more a philosophical question, but is there also like a philosophical concept behind, and is there agreement that these are the values that we are going to protect within the EU? Thank you very much.
Yes, you just reminded me yesterday's elections in France, no? I think that, yeah, I will speak on my behalf. I was celebrating yesterday, even a little bit crying. But in fact, I was crying more when Mr. Macron won the elections in the previous moment around, because it was with the European anthem walking. Big moment, but then I saw the result of Marine Le Pen, and it was a cold shower. She received more than 40%. You are politologists here, I guess. So what do you say about 40% of the people who in fact tell us, or tell the French, the message, we do not believe that this governance model, this kind of democracy works for us. This is the message. Plenty of work to be done, not only in France, because we see these figures, this distrust and this lack of certainty in almost all other member states. Even in Scandinavian countries, it is worsening. What was your question? How do we define harm? Yes, that's the issue. We discussed it many hours, how to define harmful content, not to give the sword to the hands of the possible censors on European member states level. Sorry, I am very open, but I have some concrete ideas of where the sword should not be handed over. Because when we, as politicians who are in the lead of the countries, we always know what is harmful, but it doesn't have to be objective picture, no? So we define in the European Democracy Action Plan something like, we are introducing the definition which speaks about disinformation which calls on some reaction, something we should deal with. So disinformation as the intentional and coordinated production of content with the aim to create the public harm for security, health, and environment. Daniel, am I right? So this is, we really tried to come with the first ever definition, not to let the tiger of censorship get out of the cage, yeah, because it could easily happen. So this is how we define it, and there is also harmful content in the Digital Services Act, no? So we will see how the member states will enforce this, because also for the reason of not equipping some bad boys in the governments. I will simplify from now on, because we don't have time. Not to equip them with some dangerous weapons. We never wanted to get rid of anonymity, guaranteed anonymity for online communication. Yeah, because it might be the case that the people will need to express their free opinion, that they will have to be anonymous. At the same time, I always didn't want to protect the freedom of speech of Mr. Nobody. So of the bots, of the fake accounts, of some artificial intelligence production, we need to protect the freedom of speech of people who are real and who want to express their opinions. And by the way, to conclude, harmful content, I am sure, is being defined in very rich case law in all the European member states. Because there are many cases which went up to the Supreme Court or Constitutional Courts, which had to define what is the content which is beyond the line and which should be limited, and what is the content protected by the freedom of speech. And we want Facebook and others to know these laws and to know the case law and to work in all 24 member states' languages. Because otherwise it would be one size fits all from Brussels. But what offends me as a Czech woman might not offend somebody else somewhere else. Yeah? This is the language thing.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting issue of what is harmful. In the UK, as you know, there is an online harms bill that is now going through Parliament, where the government is going to fine social media platforms for not removing certain content that is harmful but lawful. And that is very dangerous, because that is a kind of privatization of censorship, where you allow the platforms to remove things. Yeah. So this is there is a dangerous sort of, as you say, a very slippery slope. And where you stop and how you can stop is extremely difficult here, but it is a very dangerous slope. I thought I saw another hand around. Yes, there are two more, so let's take those two questions. And then I have one for you as well.
It will be the heavy one. Okay.
Thank you. One of the key issues that the big platforms are confronted with is that in Europe we speak many, many different languages. So if you take Facebook, for example, probably 90% of the contents are in English, they have probably an army of people controlling basically the contents, whereas they have probably a maximum of 10 people speaking Portuguese, probably 60 people speaking French. So it's ridiculous. They cannot control. A global platform cannot control the complexity of Europe as we speak.
Indeed, this is one of the issues we permanently try to discuss and solve with the platforms, because we want them to simply increase the capacities in each member state to be able to work in all member states' languages. Now we want them to work with Russian language to recognize the propaganda. And, this is a new thing which they have to adapt to. So we, after the Digital Services Act will come into force, we will stop begging, please work in all member states' languages. We will start enforcing, because there will be legally binding rules that they have to work in all the languages. And by the way, it will sound horrible, but what we will want them to do is to do the proper cleaning service, which costs something. And cleaning service, I mean the illegal content. Yeah? We will want them to proactively detect and identify the illegal content and to remove it and to cooperate with the law enforcement. Because crime and punishment must work also online. This is not just a Dostoevsky's, was it Dostoevsky? Invention for real life. No, we need to insist. And our patience was at the end, in fact, when we started to regulate, because I always use the example of an owner of the house and they are owners of the house, in fact. So the owner of the house organizes a party every Friday. And every Friday somebody is raped in that house. So the police comes every Friday to look for the perpetrator of the rape, the pig who did the horrible thing. And when they come for the 10th time, they will ask the owner of the house, what are you doing to ensure security of your guests? This is what we are doing now. We ask them to guarantee security, because when it comes to hate speech, dear friends, it already has a big impact on our society. We spoke recently today about the effect on women who do not want to enter politics, the women journalists who do not want to continue the job because they are and the permanent attack from the online aggressors. So we adopted the legislation against the digital gender-based violence recently. Again, the first ever in the EU. Maybe I'm not right on this, because when I was in Japan, they said that there is so much of it that they started to legislate several years ago. But the cleaning service will have to cost something, and they have to do it in all member states, all languages, understanding the member states' laws, and protecting the member states' citizens, because they are feeding them very well. I mean the citizens, so they deserve some protection.
Thank you.
And if I could ask both the questions to be asked at the same time, so if you fast way to answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much, Ms. Khan and Ms. Jourova, for such an excellent discussion. This has been really food for thought and very enriching. I think this discussion could not be more timely, because from May the 2nd to May the 5th, we'll be celebrating World Press Freedom Day. This celebration, led by UNESCO but endorsed by the UN General Assembly, will discuss this year journalism under digital siege. So we will be discussing about the multifaceted digital threats such as surveillance by state and by non-state actors, big data collection, hacking, artificial intelligence, and how these impact journalism, freedom of expression, and privacy. We, of course, will also be discussing media and literacy freedom, as Ms. Jourova said, to contribute to a more resilient population. So, more than a question, I would like to extend a warm invitation to everybody here to participate on behalf of UNESCO and join us in promoting a free, independent, and pluralistic media. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I have a plea? Could you discuss how to correct the business model?
Well, I can assure you, I will be at that conference and I will be discussing that.
We'll be looking forward to that.
Thank you for giving me a good excuse. I was asked by the European Commission Vice President to do so. At the back, I think I saw someone.
Thank you. It's another question about consensus and definition, actually, but this time in the context of the online political advertising regulations you proposed, because I think it's fair to say you take quite a broad definition of what should be considered a political ad and who should be regulated as a political advertiser. If I understand correctly, there's some debate amongst Parliament now as to whether to go with that broad definition or something more narrow, and I wonder if you could just explain why you took that broad definition, and also whether you think Parliament will in fact go with it, or perhaps propose something a bit more narrow.
Yeah, we tried to come with a legislation which will be worse being legislation, so not a declaration, but really robust, legally binding rules for online political ads. And we had to make choices. One was whether to narrow it only for the campaigning time. So, for instance, 3 weeks before elections. And we made an analysis which showed clearly that in the digital age, there is a permanent campaign. Yeah, I called it today that now the politicians are not in a black box anymore, but they are in an aquarium. Everybody sees them. And the trust in politics is not rising, but it's another story. So we decided not to limit it by time, and we decided not to limit it only for the clear-cut cases of political ads, like vote for Mr. XYZ. And so there is a definition which speaks about the content and the messaging, which has not only potential, but the intention to influence the choices of the voters. It's not precise. I don't have it in my head, but we tried to define it in the proper way, and it might be the case that in the legislative process, the European Parliament or the member states will come with more precise definition. But I would like us to keep this broad concept. Otherwise, we will target only a very, very limited sphere. We took some inspiration from Ireland, also from Australia. So we did not reinvent the wheel in this case, but we tried to come really with the definition which will also enable the digital operators to define what is political content, the so-called issues ad, no? Daniel? Yeah. Or what is just somebody's opinion who is placing it online without the intention to influence the voters. And we needed to define it because it will be sanctioned in case there will be the political content which was produced for somebody's money with the intention to influence the voters' behavior, and which will not be marked with the transparent announcement that this is the political advertising and who paid for it and how much and so on. Yeah, so we will impose this obligation on the digital players. And they say that they think that it's not such a good business to provide the space for the political advertising when we impose such strict rules, but I think I said it already.
Thank you. Well, we are almost running out of time, and I'm going to ask the Deputy High Commissioner High Commissioner for Human Rights, to now come to the stage to share her comments. And while she's coming to the stage, I will put not my question but a comment to you. I was recently in Hungary on my official country mission in Hungary to look at issues in relation to my mandate. And I can tell you there were plenty in relation to my mandate, which is about freedom of expression, about media freedom, and so on. And I looked at the media regulatory bodies, and my answer was just one phrase: media capture. And thinking of that, I then thought about the Digital Services Act coming into play, and the real success of that act is going to be at the level of the national member states and how they carry out the regulation. And that's the challenge for the European Union. I mean, what tools do you have in your toolbox to make member states toe the line? But we can have that conversation later, unless you want to go.
This is the new era, because I remember the times when we were preparing the legislation with a clear vision that it will land in the hands of the national governors who will not abuse it. We are not there yet anymore. And by the way, lucky you could go to Hungary. It's not my case anymore.
Well, maybe that's the first and last time.
You just increased my frustration now because I am prohibited to go to Russia, and also Mr. Orbán said that I am persona non grata in Hungary. And just imagine, for a Czech person, Balaton is the Czech Sea. Yeah. I will have to wait another, 5 years.
Okay, and now we turn to the Deputy High Commissioner to, I think you have a difficult task, trying to sum it up. But what we would love to hear from you is some of your own
final
thoughts
reflections
in this particular issue from the UN perspective.
Thanks very much, Irene. Thanks, first of all, to the Graduate Institute. Thanks very much to the director, Professor Sal. Thank you, Vice President Jourová. We're trying to catch up since a bit of a while, so this was a real pleasure. And of course, our very own special rapporteur, Irene. I think a sobering reminder today in this discussion of the extent of the threats. The directors started to talk about the dark side of technology, but I think also the very serious stage that we're at, I think. So difficult to summarize, of course, or provide conclusions, but I would like to reflect just on a few things. Freedom of expression. I mean, both the Commissioner and Irene rightly underscored the centrality of the protection to the right of freedom of expression and safeguarding democracy. This is very clear. Irene called it the meta right, hugely empowering on several fronts. I think the challenge remains for all of us how we protect the right to freedom of expression, particularly online, while countering all that comes with it in terms of hate speech and disinformation, and all that makes the digital public space a place of harassment and intimidation rather than one of. So that's, I think, the dilemma. Also, we've heard many important ideas about the role of states, the responsibility of states legally, the obligation, and that of companies, the responsibilities relating to potential online harms. I think this is a very serious discussion. Both need to be far more transparent when intervening, clearly. And we are clear, we know what role states have, but also I think we know, certainly from the perspective of our office, what they must not do. And I think we are very clear that states must not overstep and threaten expression. I think the Commission was clear on this. That is protected from restriction. And we know that overly broad approaches can do more damage than good, and quite often have a chilling effect on speech, and they shrink space for participation, which is critical. We also know that companies should do more. We've just heard exactly how much more, but certainly conducting human rights due diligence to identify the risks that use of their services may pose to people. And I think that they need to take all reasonable steps to prevent or mitigate these risks. For us, in accordance with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, but also, for example, and we've heard about this cleaning role, but also the labeling, the demotion, the removal of content or accounts that should be proportionate to the severity of the risk. Of course, a particularly thorny challenge that we heard about today, how we address disinformation and misinformation, and I think this will continue to live with us. We know what a destabilizing impact disinformation can have, certainly, and the responsibility particularly of social media companies. Our Human Rights Council and our special rapporteur have both spoken about disinformation is not particularly new. We've had various incarnations of it, but I think what has emerged with the development of digital technology is new pathways that have really manipulated information at a scale which is a little bit unprecedented, I think. And of course, the role of social media companies we can talk about, but also the imperative for governments, companies, and international organizations to invest in media and digital literacy. This particularly for my colleague from UNESCO, this is a big issue. But certainly, and there was a question about this, the need for educating users about inaccurate, false, and misleading information. The UN had a campaign called Verified earlier on, which was actually directly related to COVID at the time, so absolutely we saw that. And we need more collaboration with independent research. And also, I think the support to independent journalism, which really can come to grips with disinformation. The states and regional bodies have a key role to play in terms of regulation. We mentioned, of course, censorship and disinformation in situations of conflict, and Ukraine is a very glaring example. We have received very, very damning reports of widespread censorship being promoted in Russia, including widespread arrest and intimidation, recent amendments to the criminal code, for example, higher penalties, prison terms up to 15 years for those convicted of disseminating information deemed false by the authorities. And of course, many measures that I think constitute a blackout on a whole war. We all know that fake information can only be defeated with more information, never less information. I think this is very, very important. And it cannot be done without a free and plural media space, which is what we were discussing. And of course, the escalation of censorship and all of that simply increase the level of confusion and tension as we have spent. We spent a lot of time going through those images, trying to understand what they were. So it is necessary to exercise extreme caution in the implementation of those restrictions. And let me just take one example. While I think the television channels, Russia Today and Sputnik, could be seen as dangerous propaganda machines and very far from independent, does their banning by the EU meet the three-part test based on the principles of legality, necessity, and proportionality. Obviously, the EU court is going to decide that in the end. But I think we would like to note that the scope of the ban is extremely broad and would ask the question, could less severe measures have sufficed? Obviously, we're all reacting. It's very quick. We are trying to do, but I think we should also consider the repercussions of such blanket bans, which for us are quite. We've already heard about the Digital Services Act. I think we really welcome the agreement and well done on that. And I think this has been a long conversation between us. I think the important thing is it's not only establishing the rule book for online content moderation in Europe, but it will be a model for the rest of the world. And we hope that other regional entities in particular will be able to pick and choose from it. It has a lot of very positive elements. The human rights language, the clear transparency requirements for platforms are all, I think, items that can be certainly replicated going forward. And I think, yes, we will wait and see how it's going to be implemented, the negotiations first. Good luck. But I think we know that everything has to be transparent and accountable in this legal certainty and in necessity and proportionality. And I want to particularly note the importance of the participatory processes that have marked the development of the Act, which I think there was a big inclusive process, which was very, very important. And I think the same applies to a number of very ambitious initiatives that either have been taken, like the recommendation on safety of journalists from last year, which was critical, I think, to the SLAPS initiative, which is coming up, and then, of course, the EU Media Freedom Act at the end of the summer, all of which is very important. I can say more on the right to privacy. I think we just want to say that obviously in the digital realm, particularly it's daily threat, I think, particularly to human rights defenders as well as journalists and politicians around the globe. I think surveillance by governments is a big theme, and we need to be on top of that. And I think the fact that there is a real intent to investigate Pegasus and other similar spywares, I think obviously the surveillance industry has mushroomed in the absence of minimal levels of regulation and control. And so the initiative by the Parliament, the European Parliament, to investigate is really, really important. There are very disturbing things like facial recognition technology and others that I think for us are risk perpetuating and amplifying bias and discrimination. But that's a whole slew of things. Just to say that this is an ongoing conversation. We're delighted to be part of it, certainly with the Commissioner, with the Vice President, with all the bodies of the European Union, but more importantly, really how this can inform the efforts of the rest of the world where these issues are just as important. Thanks very much, Irene.
Thank you. Nada, I think on that note, that Europe, what happens in Europe doesn't stay in Europe, that it spreads out. The good, certainly. We want to see more of that. The point that you make, finally, there are global implications to what is happening here. And at the end of the day, I think you began by saying the US will never do it. They may follow you. So they didn't start. But it's not so bad. It's not so bad and there is a lot of discussion going in. President Obama, in fact, last week talked about disinformation and that the platforms need to be reined in, which I thought he must have been reading some of our material. But you can see, I think we can all see the impact that the European Union is having on many of these issues, the debates. It's not easy. It's going to be a difficult journey at the national level with member states, and also, of course, what others will learn from this and what they will pick out of it. But we are very pleased and very delighted and very privileged to have people like you in Brussels thinking about human rights and putting human rights based approach, as the High Commissioner said earlier, into this very, very important discussion. And now I would like to thank the Institute, to Professor Sal for staying with us through this and encouraging us, for the Centre, for Christine and her colleagues at the Centre for Democracy, and everyone else also from the High Commissioner's Office who've been very, very supportive. Thank you very much for this event, and I hope we will have more such events where we bring the human rights discussion, the real-life human rights discussion into the academic and bridge. I see myself as a bridge between the UN on one side and academia on the other. So it's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice evening.